The heat of midday settled over the mining town like a curse, stretching shadows long and thin across the dirt-packed square. A silence hung heavy in the air, odd for auction day. The only sound came from the creak of the wooden stage and the occasional cough from someone trying not to be seen watching too closely. Flies buzzed. Horses pawed at the dust. And on the raised platform, a woman stood barefoot, back straight, lips pressed into a line so tight it might have cut through steel. Nora Vance didn't flinch when the preacher read from his folded paper. Something about her being of sound limbs, proper years, and no known madness. The word infertile wasn't spoken, but it clung to every syllable like dried blood. Her pale dress, once good enough for church, now hung loose and damp with sweat. A rust-colored stain marred the hem from the long walk across town. She hadn't looked at the crowd once, not since stepping up. There was no dignity to salvage, only a stubborn kind of defiance in the way she held her chin. The first bid came low, $5. A banker with a bald head and soft, sausage-thick fingers, a cruel grin. Then another offer, more laughter than number, from a rail worker with whiskey on his breath. She didn't look at them, not out of pride, but because she was afraid if she did, she'd crumble. When the silence stretched too long again, the preacher cleared his throat. Fair woman, no child, but capable housekeeper, who'll take her off the burden of this town's hands. A dry voice answered, low and quiet, as if it had risen from the dirt itself. $1. Heads turned. A man stood at the edge of the square, still as a tree and just as wide, tall, dark-skinned, thick braids tied at the nape. He wore no hat. A scar curved from his brow to his jaw, pale against the copper of his face. He said nothing more, just placed a bag, small but heavy-sounding, at the base of the platform, then led forward 5 horses tethered together, no saddle on a single one. A murmur moved through the crowd like a rattler's tail. Some laughed, others scowled. One man spat. The sheriff stepped forward, eyes flicking between the horses and the woman. "State your name," he grunted. "Tom, a black horse," the man said, his voice a slow rumble. "I got coin. I got animals. I need a wife who won't leave in the night." Nora's breath caught. She'd heard that name once, whisper behind a saloon door. A Comanche scout turned landowner. Some said outlaw. Others said ghost. The kind of man that made bullets nervous. The preacher looked at her. "Miss Vance, do you contest?" She met Tama's eyes. They were black as coal and just as unreadable. There was no pity in them, no lust either. Only a kind of tired recognition, like he saw something broken in her that matched the break in him. She could say no. But then what? Go back to the shack behind the livery. Scrub more floors. Grow older, colder, and more invisible. She squared her shoulders. "I don't contest." Gasps. One woman crossed herself. A child cried out, tugged away by a mother whispering, asterisk, "Don't look. Baby, don't look." Asterisk. Thomas said nothing else. He picked up the coin pouch, tied it back to his belt, and turned away. Didn't wait for applause. Didn't even wait for her. Just walked. Nora stepped down off the platform, bare feet hitting dirt with a soft thud. The sun beat down on her skull. She followed him. By dusk. They were a mile out of town, and not a word passed between them. The silence wasn't awkward. It was survival. Words could trap. Words could betray. The land around them was vast and cracked, brittle with dry brush and orange dust. No path, just the way the horses led. Tama made camp beside a boulder shaped like a sleeping bear. He didn't ask if she was hungry, just handed her a strip of jerky and a tin of water. She ate, slowly, deliberately, and when it came time to sleep, he pointed to a flat patch near the fire and took a spot 10 paces away with his back against the rock. He didn't touch her, didn't watch her undress. He sat with his arms folded across his chest, chin dipped down, as if the entire world could burn and he wouldn't blink. She laid down and stared up at the stars, their sharp cold light cutting through the darkness like needles. Somewhere near midnight, she whispered, "Why me?" She wasn't sure if he was awake. For a long time, there was only the sound of wind pushing through the scrub, then barely audible because you didn't scream. The next morning, the journey continued. The trail veered into hills, then to a winding river choked with bones of trees long dead. They crossed it on foot. Nora's boots had been lost long before the auction, and her soles burned against the stone. On the third day, she asked him why 5 horses. "You'll need them," he replied. "For what?" He shrugged. "Planting, hauling, riding, trading, escaping." The last word sat heavy between them. She glanced over. "You expect me to run?" "I expect people to do what they're born to do, which is hurt or leave." She said nothing. The silence between them thickened, not cold, but cautious, like 2 wild things circling the same fire. By the 5th day, the hills opened up into a hidden valley, green in a way that felt like a secret. Cottonwoods lined the creek. A house squatted low and long at the base of a sandstone ridge. Smoke curled from the chimney. It wasn't grand, but it looked built to last. She didn't see anyone outside. Thomas stopped his horse. "This is it." "Where's everyone?" she asked. He dismounted, looked up at the ridge, eyes narrowed. "They're watching." As if summoned, the front door creaked open. A boy stepped out, 12, maybe 13, skin the same bronze as Thomas, hair loose and wild. He stared at Nora like she was a ghost walking barefoot across his land. Then another, and another, 5 boys in all, ranging from near-grown to still clutching a blanket. They didn't smile, didn't speak. Tama looked over his shoulder. "They're not used to kindness." "And me?" she asked, mouth dry. "You're not here to be kind." She swallowed hard. The sun was setting behind her, painting the house in long, blood-colored shadows. Somewhere behind one of those walls, her place waited. A bed, maybe. A chair. A corner. No promises. No vows. Just a beginning carved from the wreckage of 2 lives that had nothing left to give, except perhaps each other. And whatever came next. The valley breathed in hushed tones. Mist clung to the morning creek, like secrets not yet told. Nora stood just outside the doorway of the longhouse, a rough blanket over her shoulders, her breath visible in the cool air. Somewhere behind her, the floor creaked, soft footfalls, cautious as a deer approaching water. She turned slightly. The youngest of the boys, no older than 3, peeked around the corner of the hearth. His name was Tai, Tama had said. Tai of the quiet eyes. Tai who hadn't spoken a word since her arrival. The blanket slipped from her shoulder as she knelt slowly, extending her hand without a word. He stared at it, unmoving. Then a noise behind him, boots, heavier, and the boy was gone. Redmond, the oldest, appeared in his place. He stood like a wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't look at her, only past her. "You don't belong here," he said, voice flat as iron. "Don't pretend like you do." She stood, brushing the dust from her knees. "I'm not pretending." He stared at her then, really stared, long enough for discomfort to settle deep in her belly. "You will," he said, and walked off. That night, she found an old clay bowl and filled it with creek water to soak her feet. The skin had cracked from days of walking. As she sat on the stoop, she watched the shadows shift inside the house, boys moving through their silent routines, Thomas slicing meat by firelight, his silhouette still and solid. No one asked her to help. No one told her not to. She found tasks to occupy herself, sweeping the porch with a bundle of sagebrush, fetching water, mending a curtain that barely hung on. The boys ignored her. Thomas said nothing. On the 3rd evening, a storm rolled in, dry thunder, wind howling to the canyon like a wounded thing. She stood in the doorway, hair whipping across her face. Behind her, Tama moved with a slowness that wasn't laziness, but deliberation. He placed a pot of beans on the coals and spoke without looking up. "They won't speak to you until you stop trying to be liked." She blinked. "I'm not." "You are," he said. "You're waiting for them to change. It's you who has to." A flash of heat curled in her chest. "You paid for me. That doesn't mean I'm yours to break." He met her eyes and the silence stretched. The wind pressed against the walls. One of the boys dropped a spoon. "I don't want to break you," Thomas said, "but I won't protect you for what this is." They've already buried 3 women in this valley. The ground doesn't need another. The next morning, she rose before sunrise, found the garden, if it could be called that, half buried in weeds, the soil brittle and gray. A few wooden stakes remained, like bones jutting from the earth. She fetched a bucket, loosened the ground, pulled weeds until her hands ached. That afternoon, Tahi appeared. He didn't speak, just sat near the edge of the garden and watched her dig. She glanced at him once, then handed him a small spade. He took it, began to mimic her movements. They worked in silence, broken only by the wind. Days passed. She did not ask for acceptance anymore. She moved through the rhythms of the place without apology, cooked when there was nothing warm, cut wood when no one else would, bled once, from a knife slipped while scaling fish. Redmond handed her a rag without a word. It felt like something. One night, Tama brought her to the edge of the canyon. The moon hung low, yellow and heavy. He lit a pipe and passed it to her. She refused. He didn't press. "This land wasn't mine," he said. "It belonged to a woman before me. She grew herbs here," said the canyon listened. Nora looked out across the ridges. "And what did it here?" Tama exhaled smoke. "Too much. She died the day the soldiers came through. I buried her beside the tree line. She never got to say goodbye to the boys." She turned toward him, the night pressing in. "Was she their mother?" "One of them. Not all. None of them came from the same woman. But they're mine." He paused, looked at her like he wasn't sure if she could handle the weight of his next words. "I didn't buy you to replace anyone. I bought you so they'd remember the world still had people who stayed." She didn't answer right away. The wind carried the scent of cedar and ash. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. "I haven't stayed yet," she said softly. He nodded. "But you haven't run." In the weeks that followed, the boys began to shift. Redmond offered her an old saddle to sit on while mending clothes. The middle child, Eli, asked for another slice of cornbread. No eye contact, but still progress. Tahi began leaving small stones on her pillow. She didn't ask why, just arranged them on the windowsill like they meant something. Then came the letter. It arrived with a peddler, dusty, leather-faced, pulling a cart of copper kettles and dried apples. He handed it to her, without comment. The envelope bore her real name, not the one Tama knew, not the one the town had stamped on the auction bill. Evelyn Vance, written in sharp black ink. Her sister's name. Nora took the letter behind the shed, opened it with shaking fingers. "Evelyn," it read, *, "I don't forgive you for sending Unia. I don't forgive you for pretending. But if you're alive, tell me who he is. Tell me what you've done, *. The letter dropped from her hand. Dust swirled around her ankles. Her mouth went dry. She hadn't thought of her sister in weeks. Hadn't let herself. But the name on that paper cracked something in her, something still soft. She buried the letter behind the coop, not out of shame, not yet, but because she didn't know what truth she owed anyone anymore. That night, she found Tahi asleep beside the fire, curled into a ball. Redmond sat nearby, whittling a piece of driftwood into something sharp and bird-like. She sat beside them, didn't speak. When Tama entered, his face was harder than usual. He carried a rifle in one hand, a scrap of cloth in the other. He laid the cloth down on the table. A woman's kerchief. Frayed. Dirty. "Someone's been watching the ridge," he said, "looking for us." Nora stood slowly. "How do you know?" He looked at her, not with suspicion, but with something closer to regret. "Because I've seen this mark before," he said. "And the last time I did, it meant death followed close behind." The morning sun crept through the cottonwoods like a secret too shy to shout. Nora stood at the water trough, scrubbing Redmond's shirt with stiff fingers, knuckles raw from lying cold. Chickens murmured nearby. Somewhere inside, the boys argued in low voices, and one of them slammed a door. The valley was waking up uneasy. Tama hadn't spoken much since finding the kerchief. He moved like a man shouldering old ghosts, careful, distant, and twice as silent. At night, he sat by the fire with a rifle across his lap, watching the dark through narrowed eyes. He never explained who the symbol belonged to, nor what kind of death followed it. But the way he handled that cloth, like it was soaked in something worse than blood, told her everything she needed to know. Nora had burned the letter from Evelyn, buried the ashes in the garden under the baby carrot she and Ty had planted. Still, she felt her sister's name in her chest like grit in a wound. Unseen but always irritating. She betrayed her, hadn't she? Taken her place, her name, her fate. But the truth was harder than the lie now. Out here, Evelyn was just a word. Nora had become someone else. Someone who didn't flinch. Someone who kept her back straight even as the world leaned crooked. By midday, a rider appeared on the distant ridge, just a shadow against the sky, unmoving, watching. Nora saw him while gathering firewood. She froze, logs cradled in her arms, breath shallow. She didn't call out, just stood and stared until a rider turned and vanished behind a rise, leaving nothing but a thin line of dust in his wake. That evening, she told Tama. He didn't seem surprised, only nodded and said, "We have 3 days, maybe less." For what? For them to come down. Who is it? He didn't answer right away. He poured himself water, took a long drink, then looked past her to the edge of the house, where Redmond was oiling his knife. They called themselves the Boone Men, traders, bounty hunters, hired blades. Not law, but worse. Evelyn once married into that family. Didn't end clean. Nora blinked. You knew her? Tama met her eyes then. I knew of her. Men like Boone don't let go easy. Especially not a woman who escaped with someone else's name. The world tilted slightly beneath her. She staggered back a step. So they're here for me. No, he said, firm. They're here for what you represent. A name passed off like currency. They think your property gone missing. Nora turned to stare at the horizon. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let them see. Then we should leave. We don't run from ghosts, Thomas said. We light fires to keep them from crossing. That night, they armed the boys. Redmond already knew his way around a rifle. Eli needed coaxing. Even Tahi was given a small sling and taught how to hide behind the coop. Nora worked through the night, preparing salves, boiling water, loading ammo into belts. The storm building wasn't just out in the valley. It was inside her, too, pressing against old shame, old weakness. At some point before dawn, she stepped outside. The wind had picked up. Her hair whipped around her face, eyes stinging with dust. She walked to the garden without thinking, knelt in the dirt, and dug her hands into the cold soil. I'm not Evelyn, she whispered into the ground. The wind carried her voice nowhere, but something shifted in her chest, a knot loosening, footsteps behind her. She turned and found Redmond watching her. You're not her, he said. I knew the moment you sang that lullaby to Tahi. Evelyn never sang. Nora swallowed hard. Then why didn't you say anything? He shrugged. Didn't matter. You stayed. She wouldn't have. He turned to go, then stopped. You ever killed a man? No. Then don't aim unless you mean it. The next day passed like a hell breath. No riders. No shots. Just a stillness before thunderhead breaks. Thomas sharpened his blade until the edge could split hairs. Nora packed food, water, wrapped Tahi's risen cloth to keep him from burning his hands if he had to run. The sun rose blood orange and low, casting long blades of light across the valley. Every breath the land took fell shallow, like even the earth feared what was coming. Nora stood on the porch with Redmond at her side, the boy's jaw tight, his rifle slung and ready. She wore a borrowed coat, Tama's, too wide across her shoulders, still holding the scent of ash and tobacco. The others were already in position. Eli on the roof with his slingshot, Ty hidden behind the water barrels, Tama himself seated on the porch rail, calm as a man waiting for rain. They came just past noon. 6 riders. Dust devils trailing them like curses. Boone men, just as Tama had warned. Faces marked by violence, eyes sunburned and predatory. At their center rode a man with a thick beard and a coat made of black buffalo hide. He looked like someone who had never once apologized and didn't intend to start now. The rider stopped 30 paces out. I don't see Evelyn, the man called, grinning like it pained him. Nora stepped forward, boots scraping wood. That's because she's not here. You sure wear her face. I wear my own now. The man tilted his head. You owe me a debt, girl. Stolen time. Stolen name. And that boy, he gestured toward Redmond. I heard his daddy was Union. You've gathered yourself quite the collection of broken things. Thomas stood then, slow, deliberate. His rifle rested against the post. He didn't reach for it. That's enough. The man's grin vanished. This ain't your fight, half-breed. Thomas' voice was steady. Then why'd you come to my home to start it? One of the Boone riders shifted in the saddle, uneasy. A hawk cried overhead. The wind stilled, like the valley itself was holding its breath. The bearded man clicked his tongue. You got one chance. Give me the girl. We ride away. Nobody bleeds who don't have to. Nora stepped down from the porch. Her boots hit dirt, hard and sure. I'm not leaving, she said. Not again. Redmond moved as if to follow, but Tama raised a hand. She stopped halfway between the porch and the riders, her shoulders squared. You want me? Come take me, she said. But know this, you'll never find a valley that forgets what you do to it. The silence that followed cracked like thunder. The bearded man snarled and raised his hand. A shot rang out. Dust exploded near Nora's feet. Then chaos. Redmond fired from the porch, dropping the rider to the left. Eli struck another with a stone to the temple, sending him reeling. Tai let out a cry behind the barrels, small and fierce. Tama moved like a shadow cut loose, no wasted motion. He slammed the Boone man to the ground, knife flashing, wrist twisting with the force of a man who had survived too much to die now. Nora ducked as another rider charged her. She rolled, grabbed the rifle Redmond had tossed, and pulled the trigger. Her first shot went wide. The second didn't. The man collapsed mid-turn, hitting the dirt in a heap. Screams echoed. Gunfire roared. Horses panicked, rearing and fleeing in every direction. When the dust finally settled, only one Boone man remained, the bearded one. He stood with blood trickling from his mouth, revolver hanging useless at his side. You ain't worth this land, he spat at Tama. You think raising another man's bastards makes you strong? Makes you clean. Tama wiped blood from his lip. It makes me whole. The Boone man raised his gun. Nora fired. This time, she didn't miss. The man dropped where he stood, his body hitting the earth like an ending. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Redmond exhaled, the breath shaking out at him like a storm leaving the bones. Eli climbed down from the roof. Tai ran to Nora, arms thrown around her legs. She knelt, held him close, forehead against his. Thomas sat back down on the porch rail, blood seeping from a cut above his eye. It's over, he said. But it wasn't. It was beginning. They buried the dead at the edge of the ridge, beneath the cottonwoods. No prayers, just silence and stone. The boys helped. Even Tahi carried rocks. That night, the fire burned brighter than it had in weeks. Redmond smiled. Real, if only for a second. Eli played a song on a handmade flute. Nora stirred stew and hummed under her breath, and none of the boys told her to stop. Thomas sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. You didn't have to do it, he murmured. I did, she answered, because they made me someone I never wanted to be. But you let me become someone worth protecting. He looked at her, the firelight catching the lines around his eyes. You're more than that. Maybe, she said, but it's enough for now. He nodded once, and then, slowly, like a man learning how to trust the sky again, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Outside, the valley slept, the wind carrying no fear, only the quiet song of something sacred being born from ruin. By evening, the first Boone rider returned. Closer this time, down near the edge of the ravine. He didn't wear a badge, just a rust-colored coat and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. Thomas stood on the porch, rifle across his arms. You got the wrong place, he called out. The rider smiled. I've got the right name. Evelyn Vance. Or whoever's wearing her skin. I bought a woman fair. Ain't no crime in that. No, but there's a debt left unpaid. And the man she ran from wants her back. Whole or in pieces. Nora stepped forward then. The rider tilted his head, amused. "You don't look like someone worth dying for," he said. She replied, steady, "You don't look like someone smart enough to know when he's already lost." The rider spat. 2 days, then we come down. He turned and rode off, disappearing into the dry wash like a ghost returning to its grave. That night, Nora sat beside Tama as the fire crackled low. The boys were inside, pretending to sleep. "Will we win?" she asked. Tama shook his head. "That's not what we're doing. We're not trying to win. We're trying to end it." Nora nodded slowly. "Then I'll end it beside you." He looked over at her, eyes soft for the first time in days. "You were never bought. That was just the excuse I gave myself for needing someone to stay." She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Outside, the wind carried dust and dry leaves across the valley. The sky turned copper, and somewhere far off, a storm was coming.